谢谢大家今天来参与今天的座谈。今天的座谈的主题是加勒比海的魅影与其殖民时期的残余物。那这个座谈呢，其实是在 Nexus 下面的其中一个座谈活动。那这次有邀请两位艺术家是 Sharelly Emanuelson and Christoher Cozier。
Well, thank you everyone for coming to this event today. It's about uncovering the phantom and remnants of colonialism in the Caribbean. Today is a part of the Nexus exhibitions that are happening now in MoCA TAIPEI. Today we have two artists with us, Sharelly Emanuelson and Christoher Cozier.
那我是今天的主持人，是陈伟伦，是独立策展人。那很荣幸可以参与这个座谈，然后我也在这个准备的过程去了解到其实加勒比海地区不同的状况。那等一下我会稍微介绍一下两位艺术家给大家。
I'm Willen. I'm an independent creator. It's my pleasure to be part of this talk. And later on, I will briefly introduce our two artists to everyone here.
Yeah. 好，那我先介绍一下 Christoher Cozier， 他是加勒比海地区在千里达地区的艺术家。那他其实在他过去的作品，其实大部分都会处理到关于物件在全球流动的状况，以及它如何反映加勒比海地区的工业的状况。那他近期的展览，比如说像这次展览的作品呢，其实也是在沙加双年展的时候有展出。那过去他们现在有经营一个空间，一个艺术团体叫 Alice Yard， 然后他们就是很致力于在推广整个加勒比海地区的艺术的交流。
So Christoher Cozier is from Trinidad and Tobago, and his works mostly talk about how object travels around the world in the globalized systems, especially about also about Caribbean industry as well. He has been working on a collective called Art Alice Yard, and the work that we are showing this time in Taipei was also shown in Saja Biennial as well. Alice Yard is working on also highlighting artists and artworks from the Caribbean.
那 Sharelly Emanuelson 的话，他其实他的创作有很多不同的面向。他过去其实有拍摄不同的纪录片的影片，他会谈论到关于家庭啊，关于不同的身份的议题。那他其实除了纪录片之外，他其实常常也会做摄影或是录像等等不同的作品形式。那等一下在他的分享的过程里面，他其实也会谈到他的创作如何去谈及关于加勒比海地区的历史的状况。
And Sharelly Emanuelson is an artist now based in the Netherlands at the moment, and her works focus. In the past, she used to produce documentaries that talk about family and identity. She also used different forms, such as photos or videos, to convey the messages. Today, in her talk, she also talks about how different forms take shapes, or how she used different forms to convey the message and the contents she want to deliver through the artworks.
那 Sharelly 的话，他其实除了自己的创作之外，就这两位艺术家很特别的是，他们也有组织一个叫做 Uni Art 的基金会，也是在推广加勒比海地区的艺术交流的状况。那今天我们的座谈就是主要针对是他们今天两位的作品，所以假如我们之后有其他机会的话，我自己也蛮想要知道这两个不同的艺术团体是怎么运作。
Sharelly is also involved in Uni Arte, some foundations that talks about the Caribbean the artists, and also how they have exchanges with other parts of the world. In the future, if we have other opportunities, I would also love to hear about, for example, how Art Collective Alice Yard and Uni Artists also involve and interact with other artists.
那等一下我们的座谈呢，会是先以两位艺术家的作品先做分享，会先是 Sharelly 开始，然后再是 Christoher。那最后如果观众有任何问题的话，其实可以在我们的直播链接下面做回应，我会把这个问题问艺术家，然后让艺术家来做回复。
So later on, we'll start with presentation by Sharelly, followed by Christoher. And for all the audience online, if you have any questions, feel free to type in the comments. And later on, we'll also announce and read them for you.
那我们就先欢迎那个 Sharelly 来为我们做他的创作的分享。
So without further ado, let's hand up microphones to Sharelly Emanuelson, and the floor is yours.
Hi everyone. It's thank you. I would like to thank the opportunity to MoCA TAIPEI, the curator Sasha Days. Right now it's it's 4 o'clock in the morning where I'm at the moment. So I'll do my best to kind of stay as sharp as possible. I would like to start by saying that it's an honor to share a space with other artists from the Caribbean. And during this presentation, Chris, whom I have had the opportunity to meet, and I hope to meet the others as well in the near future. I think for this presentation, I will start off with an introduction of my artistic practice, so kind of saying what I'm trying to do with my work, and also some of the aims that I've set out for myself. Then I will talk about the transitioning, so what really happened or what I started realizing for me to kind of shift. And then I will show or talk about 4 works that were made in different points in time that can also give an indication of my process and how I've incorporated certain themes that keep coming back. So I'll start off with the introduction. So I was always drawn to storytelling because of its ability to draw me in and provide me with different perspectives. Oh, maybe I should wait for the translator. Sorry.
Alright. 好，感谢大家今天参加会座谈。我现在所在时区是凌晨4点钟，所以我会尽量的保持自己脑袋清醒。很高兴这次有机会受台北当代馆还有Sharelly之邀参与这次展览，那很高兴有机会能够在线上跟不同的加勒比海艺术家一起互动。那 Christoher 之前曾经我们曾经面对面讨论过的，很期待未来有机会可以跟其他的加勒比海艺术家一起互动跟讨论。今天要跟各位介绍的是我自己的艺术实践，而且我要跟各位说明我自己在创作时候有哪些意图，然后有哪些不同的转变跟过程。那之后在今天的介绍当中会介绍4件在不同时期所做的作品，来呈现出我的创作的这个过程还有创作的方式。那我一直都很喜欢说故事这个过程，因为我觉得说故事可以让我们看到不同的观点。Back to you.
So, as I was saying, so I was always drawn to storytelling, and that led me to really get into filmmaking since I was early. Since I was early and young, I wanted to be in filmmaking. But then after, I quickly decided to turn my practice into an artistic research practice. And this came out of my inquisitive nature and my need to understand the world I was living in, where I grew up, and the need to retell or articulate better what it is I had seen or experienced to other people. So as a person who is actively concerned with making things and wanting people to experience them, it is with time that I became more aware of my positioning and the control I can have over what is seen, who is seen, and in what way people are being seen.
在一开始我本来想要做的是影片制作还有电影制作，尤其是纪录片的制作，但后来呢，我觉得我的实践很快速的转变成从事艺术研究方面的实践。那一开始其实是因为我自己对于周遭的环境跟周遭的人事物非常的好奇，也想去了解我自己所在的世界有什么样的变化，有什么样的情况的过去的历程，还有未来的可能性等等。我也希望透过这样的过程里面，可以把我所知道的事情、看到的东西能够传达跟分享给其他人。那这样的过程当中的时候，我自己有了很多不同的体验，也希望让更多人能够有这样的体验。然后在这样的过程里面，我也慢慢的意识到，我到底在这样的过程当中，还有我的这个所在的世界当中，到底位在什么样的身份跟角色，然后如何把我所见的人事物，还有所见所闻，能够透过不同的媒介，还有媒材分享，还有传达给其他人。
So with my works, I both engage in creating and questioning the idea of this internal gaze or a local gaze, if you will. I ask myself, how can I contribute differently to a stream of production that comes out of a colonial and imperial past? So what can I make of all these fragmented elements, stories, traditions that are coming from everywhere, but are every day anew being reinvented or being visible to us? I ask myself, in what way am I contributing to the act of reinvention myself and reimagination myself with the works I create from my own point of view, which is a point of view that is subjective, historically embedded, but also often something that would be erased otherwise or forgotten or even never captured.
我在过程当中也会不断的思考，到底比如说这些所谓的内部或在地的凝视这样的概念是什么样的，要如何发展，然后如何跟他们一起互动等等。我自己也在思考，我们毕竟加勒比海地区过去有很多这些殖民时期或帝国主义时期的历史，那在这样的历史之后呢，我要如何去贡献，然后去产生不同的制作跟不同的产出。另外一方面是我在周遭过程当中，其实收集到各种不同的碎片、段落、故事或者是传统等等，要如何把它们拼凑起来之后去传达我要说的故事，跟我要如何去让它去重新的再现在我们的眼前。那这也是我自己不断在思考，我要如何去呈现我自己的观点。当然我自己的观点有它的主观所在，有它的历史背景所在，可是在过去的时候其实往往是被人遗忘、忽略，或者是没有机会记录下来的。
Yes, so I choose then to look at intersections of different disciplines and combining my art as well with my academic pursuits and interest, because I think that through artistic and embodied knowledge, there is an opportunity to show and tell a more transnational understanding of things that we're experiencing in the world today. So I try to offer a space where people can actively engage and construct narratives based on what is being presented to them through my work, based on what they know already from themselves or from where they're from or their memory. And I invite people to feel also the not knowing. So usually there is no translation or too much explanation, but having to really turn to one's own imagination to what is being presented. And so trying to grant the audience as well a space to become a co-author and offer an assemblage that's open-ended, really. So in working with the capability and incapability of representing this post-colonial space, I provide a contextual reality of my experiences of a particular Creole space. And I invite someone to stay present into like kind of the state of ambiguity, of uncertainty, or that, yeah, it's a common daily experience where I'm from.
我在过程里面也去寻找不同领域之间有什么样的交集，透过跨领域的方式去混合我的创作实践，还有我的学术研究。我觉得透过这样的方式之后，能够有机会让大家能够去了解我们在现在这个时代、还有这个空间里面的加勒比海人们所了解这些跨国、跨领域世界的内容的时候，应该如何去感受。那我通常去创造出来是一个空间，让大家能够去介入，能够去参与，进而去建构出自己所知的这些论述，或者建构出一个新的论述。那当然很多时候每个人都是依据他们自己所已知的事物之后，进而去想象跟设想他们所见到的事物。所以我希望大家可以在过程里面看到一些也许是未知的事情、不清楚的事情，但透过彼此的想象力之后，去试图了解对方。我的作品里面通常不会有太多翻译或太多的解释跟诠释，希望让大家有更多的机会可以一同去参与，去提供这些开放式的解答的方式。那当然一方面我们试图也 去呈现这些所谓后殖民时代跟时空背景这样的环境。但我也希望透过这样的呈现方式之后，让大家了解到我们所在加勒比海地区的时候，每一天都处于这个不安、迷惘或者是混沌的情况的感受。
So if the next slide, I will talk about the process of how, so from my documentary practice, kind of certain, things that really made me transition. And later on, I will go into some of these works. So once I understood that cinema's relationship with the Caribbean is developed based on being a place where foreign production really exploits the popular image of the so-called tropical island or a third worldly image. I couldn't just keep making from an ongoing lineage of makers. One, even though there are local productions being made, it's not in ratio, it's not in a balance. And I wanted to understand the dominant narratives that have informed us in the context of the Dutch Caribbean. I wanted to create new material out of me revisiting historical and political sources and understand better this notion of this external point of view that have mostly contributed to our perception, the stereotypical notions of who we are as Dutch Antillians or Antillians and what we are supposed to be.
在过程里面，我接下来跟各位介绍的4部作品呢，能够去呈现出我如何从纪录片的领域，后来逐渐跨入到录像艺术的领域，而如何透过不同的方式去看待，比如说外国的电影跟作品当中的时候，如何在想象我们的时候，永远认为加勒比海就是所谓的热带岛屿或所谓的第三世界这样的印象跟形象。那在这种情况之下，我就不能够继续去遵循或者是依循传统的这个电影的拍摄的路线跟路径，因为当然虽然加勒比海也有一些电影的拍摄工作，可是以比例上而言的时候，大多数我们所见到的还是来自于西方或者是这些过去前殖民者他们所拍摄出来的作品，然后进而让我们去了解我们自己在这个所谓荷属加勒比海地区的这个领域当中的什么样的脉络跟背景。我希望能够透过这些回顾历史还有政治内容的这个过程当中，去产生出新的素材跟新的来源，然后让大家能够透过我们自己的观点之后去了解我们自己所在的地方，然后不论是刻板印象或者是试图打破这样的刻板印象，让我们了解到底在这样的环境当中，身为加勒比海的一员或一份子是什么样的感受。
So today the Caribbean is still very much being dominated by foreign film and media culture, which can bring a particular distortion of both the representations and the perspectives of the reality of life, Caribbean life or island life. And this power of global media and cinema circulation during history turned cinema really in an ideal tool, which also was used by dominant nations to present like this imperial-driven stories, facilitating an audience this experience of national identity and imperial belonging. So when it comes to in the Dutch context, the early photography that has been produced, and also when you look at film or news reports, you can also say that the imagery comes from is used to foster this type of nationhood and national identity that is serving a Dutch point of view. So you can see that in the way that the island has a heavy focus on landscape and the Dutch heritage, so that were being developed at that time, revealing this positive, useful image of the island, but also showing its similarities rather than difference of this place far away. And often what is left out are the people and culture as cultural aspects that are barely shown in those images.
在加勒比海地区，现在当然主宰的主要的这个影视内容，当然还是属于来自于外来的电影跟媒体的内容跟文化。这种情况的时候，他们在去呈现加勒比海的现实的时候，常常会有一些扭曲，还有那一些的差异跟不同于实质的情况。现在这些的全球的媒体跟电影的这个环境流通的情况之下，让我们现在看到，其实现在很多的时候，这些的国家他们其实透过电影或者这些的影像的工具呢，去试图让大家去产生对于某些国家产生特定的想望或归属感，而这样的模式的就好像过去帝国主义的模式继续去笼罩跟主宰着我们的想象。我们现在在网络上面可以看得到来自于17世纪的这些的早期的影像跟照片，其实都是来自于荷兰的观点跟荷兰的想象，他们试图去让大家在这些他们的殖民地当中的时候，对于荷兰有更多国家的认同。他们当时想象的这些的岛屿呢，都强调去呈现的是岛屿上面的生活，这些岛屿是很有用的，他们很有不同的利用价值，或者是当时的荷兰在当地已经去建立了什么样的这种传统等等。另外一方面是他们也去呈现这些岛屿的生活，其实在很多层面他们认为要强调的是跟荷兰很多相似之处，但是在过程里面当地的民众跟当地的文化反而就遭到忽略了。
So in the book of, I encountered the book of Patricia Mohammed back in the day where it's called Imagining the Caribbean. And there she also talks about this European gaze and how that is reproduced, is a reproduced Eurocentric way of looking at the Caribbean region, which is still lingering in many media productions and even in the region itself that is being produced. I was inspired by many people, but also Bell Hooks and Grada Quilomba on their mentions on how identities created by others and how histories are only named in ways that define our relationship to those who are subjects, and how by kind of bringing in and writing yourself, your narrative, it kind of also becomes like this political act and an act of decolonization. And that is something that kind of helped me through really shifting and being like, no, okay, so if I would have to I started really looking for, okay, if I produce myself, how would I engage in this media? And what would I tell? How would I tell it? And what would I show?
有一位学者叫做 Patricia Mohammed， 他曾经在作品里面提到想象加勒比海的时候，很多人还是不免会继续的延续过去这种欧洲的凝视跟欧洲的观点，以欧洲的角度来看待加勒比海，甚至在很多加勒比海他们自己当地的制作里面也沿用了这样的来自欧洲的观点。我其实灵感来自于很多不同的学者跟研究人员，比如说 Bell Hooks 跟Grada Quilomba， 他也曾经提到过，在很多的情况之下，我们的身份认同其实是他人所创造的，或者是我们的历史在叙述的时候，其实都在描述的是我们跟某一个对象之间的关系，那我们的关系之间才写成了历史。这种情况之下，让我去重新思考，如何能够透过书写，也是一种去殖民化的方式，让我们以自己为主体来书写这段历史跟这段过程，然后也要去重新去思考到底在过程里面有没有可能新的可能性跟新的发展的机会。那我自己在利用录像或者是影像这样的媒介的时候，是不是有可能去颠覆和去翻转这样的过程，让我们不再去完全依赖欧洲观点，而用我们自己的观点来叙述这样的过去跟历史。
Yes, so when I speak of the Caribbean region, for me it would be mostly Dutch Caribbean, so which consists of 6 islands, and which are each different in itself. Just like the region, I think every island you step on would have similarities and would be totally different. And I really enjoy working from there because it really, every day it reminds me how it is impossible to work in absolute modes of thinking. And since 2012, you can say I expanded my documentary practice towards a more art context that has allowed me not only to address a story differently, but also to address the conditions of the medium that I use in itself. So the use of camera, the use of editing, or what I'm presenting.
我今天所提到的这个所谓加勒比海地区呢，对我来说是所谓过去荷兰所殖民的这6个岛屿。那当然，加勒比海有很多不同的岛屿。那我刚才提到的荷兰殖民下这6个岛屿，其实也各有不同。然后呢，其实在这过程当中，其实我每一次就像知道各个岛屿一样，到踏上这些岛屿之后，都会有一些相异跟相似之处。那我也去思考，到底每一个岛屿之间，他们在呈现的时候有什么样的怎么样的差异等等。从2012年之后呢，其实我陆续去延伸跟扩大了我的这个艺术实践，从过去一开始的时候以纪录片为主，到慢慢的开始加入更多的艺术的艺术的内容、艺术的角度，所以不论从摄影的方式、拍摄的方式或者剪辑的方式，我都能够从纪录片为出发点，然后之后延伸还要去产生出各种更多元性，还有更扩大延展性的角度跟呈现。
So now I will just go quickly talk about some of these works, and you will be able to see a bit. It's a kind of really an idea to give you an idea of what the images look like. I will start with moments. So
接下来我们要给各位看4个作品。那在看作品的途中的时候呢，我们就可以请工作人员来顺便放一下这个其中的影片，让大家看一下，有大致的感觉，知道每一个作品的呈现方式。那第一个作品是 Moments。
Yeah. So this is this is the audience. What you're seeing right now is the unintended audience, but maybe if we can go to the work of Moments.
好，不是这一部，我们要请工作人员换到 Moments 这部作品，不是 Unintended Audience。
Yeah, so Moments is a video essay, and here I'm diving into my personal archive and revisiting the past recordings of my mother, who filmed me and my brother growing up, and also archive footage I shot during my early 20s before migrating to the Netherlands for my studies. So in the edit, I also interweaved found footage of the large migration periods from the islands to the Netherlands, where most people were going to work in fabric in companies in the Netherlands. And I really try to think about the narratives around progress and how it's always situated elsewhere, and that you must leave in order to develop, in order to grow, but never really completely belonging in this new place during this pursuit of progress. And my understanding of how the Antillean identity was a project in itself, that in official terms it kind of failed, because so you had the Dutch Antilles, which is a constellation, had its own flag, but then they separated each island, but this kind of still remains present in a particular collective memory as an alternative belonging. So in using the footage of my personal archive and firsthand recordings, I'm reclaiming a space of telling a subjective experience through time by bringing the complexity of creating one's own narrative in a world where mostly is told from agenda-driven media that were used as propaganda or political endeavors. So I'm trying to do that a bit with this work.
各位看到这部作品叫做 Moments， 在这个作品当中，其实我在回顾的是我自己过去个人很多的历史记录。然后呢，我的母亲在我小时候的时候就常常拿摄影机去拍摄我跟哥哥的这个成长的历程。那另外一方面呢，我也在里面掺杂了很多我年轻的时候呢，在即将要前往荷兰去念书之前的时候的一些不同的影像跟记录。那我也在里面穿插了很多过去的历史影片，在描述的是很多的这些加勒比海的岛国的民众呢，都被教育跟影响，他们在这过程里面都认为说，你一定要前往荷兰或前往其他地方，才有机会去成长，才有机会去发展。这样的论述观点里面的时候，成长跟发展还有进步，似乎永远都 出现在别的地方，你一定要前往他处，前往其他的地方之后，才有机会能够获得成长、发展跟进步等等。那这过程里面，我们也在思考的是，虽然说我们都把这个地区称为河属的加勒比海地区或是河属安第列斯地区，但是其实这每个岛屿之间各有不同，所以这个集体的身份认同，其实严格上来说是不成立的。可是呢，还是存在在我们很多人的共同集体记忆当中，因为不断的被灌输跟教育说，我们就是这个所谓河属安第列斯、河属加勒比海地区的一员，但是我们彼此之间其实并没有太多的了解。我透过自己的个人的记录跟这些的第一手的记录影片之后呢，希望能够让我自己回归到自己的主体，然后不再是他人所赋予我或他人所帮我建构这样的身份认同，然后让我们能够去知道到底在过去的这些所谓有特殊意涵、特殊目的的媒体的内容当中的时候，到底有什么内容被忽略了？因为毕竟这些特定的议题或特定目的的这些媒体，过去可能是作为政治宣传或者有其他政治的意图跟目的，而反而忽略了很多我们自己身为加勒比海议员的主体。
Okay, so then we move on to Don't Mix Me Up. Don't Mix Me Up is a installation, and there I started to play with the invisibility and the discrepancy to interrupt the video fabric. Here, my recordings would disrupt a general reading or prevent a total documentation of this globally known event like Carnival, but while still being able to capture a particular essence of this tradition, right? So in Don't Mix Me Up, I shield the bodies captured through my camera from the viewer's gaze in an attempt to activate the audience memory and attunement to a presentation of what they're supposed to see from their own memory if they have experienced it, or by what they can gather from listening to a live recording that is also in the audio.
各位看到第二个作品叫做 Don't Mix It Up， 但这个作品是一项装置艺术作品。那我们是不是在这里呈现的是透过这个隐形跟隐身的方式，然后让大家能够去看到这个录像有什么样的呈现的可能性。这边的话，我们试图去让各位去翻转或去颠覆我们过去认为说录像的话能够让所有东西都完全的记录下来这样的印象，然后让大家能够去看到，其实很多时候有些东西我们即便是大家都所知的影像，比如说嘉年华会或者嘉年华会的这个活动的时候，即便你没有看到全貌，但是也许你可以透过自己脑补的方式，或透过自己的不同的印象的方式，去呈现出这项传统的基础。所以这边看到的是，即便各位看不到当时这些表演者，可是透过了这个影像还有这其中的光点之后呢，我们似乎还是能够去特地的去把它串联起来之后，能够绘画出我们当时所认知的样貌，或者是我们所想象的样貌。或者如果你没有经历过或者感受过嘉年华会的话，透过旁边的这个男性的声音或女性的声音来说明跟报道的时候，你是不是能够在脑海中建构出对于特定传统跟印象的画面？
Okay, and then you have another work, Ciudadanos, that was made after. About a year after, and this is the work that's currently showing in Nexus, and which is also an audiovisual installation. And basically here you see the screens, the two screens, but in the installation they're curved screens, and it's showing you an assemblage of recordings where I'm letting you immerse in between two specific sites on San Martin. One showing me being on a roof of a house, and the other one a tree that's been taken out right after the Hurricane Gonzalo. So when you're standing between, you have 8 channel speakers that is showering you with a polyphony of different tracks of voices, ambient sounds of the wind, sea, but also birds, barking, neighborhoods, different music genres, and interviews that I shot. And this work talks about the various reasons for conflict or the residue of the colonial era that still really remains visible or is felt. And even consequences of this hyper-industrial period that was experienced on the island, on most of the Dutch islands, and also this new aftermath of tourism that is also experienced. But I wanted to do it in a way that also keeps recognizing this change and a changing population that also very much exists, and leave room for all these ideas about what national unity means and has to become, because it was shot right after 10-10-10, which is when the Dutch Antillean Islands were kind of separated and had to become their own national identity, separate identity. So what would a St. Martiner be was really, after 5 years, still very much a discussion that people were having. And so I try to give different perspectives and positioning you as an audience really with your body between all these narratives, and this loop kind of recreating, working, building houses, and kind of how everything is kind of being, every year when the season comes, kind of have to know that everything can be destroyed again, or most of it, and you have to rebuild. So you kind of in this vicious cycle where you continuously live in a this ambiguous state that I've mentioned earlier, no?
好，接下来看到这个作品叫做 Ciudadanos， 叫做公民，这也是我们现在在台北当代馆里面正在展出的作品。那这些作品是2015年所创作跟制作出来的。各位到了展间的时候呢，现在看到是2个不同的录像频道，到时候在展间的时候，各位看到会是2个曲面的荧幕之后，把各位环绕起来，让各位看到左右两边看到不同的录像频道。那站到这2个录像频道中间的时候呢，会有8个指向性的喇叭，那每个指向性喇叭的内容当中会诉说不一样的内容，有不同的片段，可能包括虫鸣鸟叫啊，或者是社区里面的狗吠声，或者是有一些民众他们在叙述自己所经历过的体验等等。这个是当时2015年他们2014年经历过了非常大的飓风台风 Gonzalo 之后的这个断垣残壁的画面。那这些画面都是在这个圣马丁这个岛屿上面所拍摄的画面。那其中内容的时候会提到各种不同的冲突的原因啊，或者是可能过去殖民时期的遗毒或者遗绪等等，还有在现在加勒比海地区旅游业或观光业快速发展之下会有什么样的影响。那在这些岛屿当中的时候，也面对到各种不同的变迁。而这个地方呢，其实在2010年的时候，荷兰曾经在这个当地举办了公投，让这6个岛屿的民众决定到底要继续隶属在荷兰的一部分，还是要成为独立的国家。那在2010年公投之后，刚才提到这个作品是在2014年、15年所拍摄的。过程当中的时候，他这些民众也会思考，在这样的新身份当中要如何去重建自己的新身份。如果独立成了国家之后，这个国家的意识跟国家的身份认同要如何去建构。而且他们这些国家在每一年都会有飓风来袭，那他们几乎是年年都面临飓风来袭的情况之下，随时有可能家园就被摧毁，必须要重建。那在这个一而再再而三必须被摧毁被重建的过程当中的时候，他们如何在这样的模糊的不明确或者是暧昧的生活当中继续下去，这也是我刚才提到的我们的居民在当地所常常面对到的主题。
Yes, and so going to one of the more recent works, the unintended audience. With unintended audience, that is a back to a video essay where I returned to go back to the archive material that I found when I was making Moments. So in 2012, it like almost 8 years passed, and I was finally able to kind of we work the material, and these are because first I wasn't ready to work with this archive material that was made. So to give an idea, each island would have these news reporting being done. So the visits of the king and queen on the islands, but also the certain plantation fields, but also a lot of landscape images. But these it was the first time that I saw all these footages that normally you cannot find on the island. It was when I was studying that I came to find this material. And in this work, I let my personal reflection of having to deal with this archive and using this archive. I do that in a voiceover text, kind of, but then I'm also creating something new. So you kind of can see a pixelated face. I'm putting another type of sound, which is music, but if you can understand the language, it's very politically driven as well. So I'm totally competing you and bringing you a lot of images that you kind of need to make choices of what you decide to kind of follow. You could be revisiting the work each time. And let me see. And it's really, this work, what I started to doing is really a way of speaking back to the archive, because this work also lives in the archives at the moment. So while people are searching and looking for information or old footage, they will find these old documentations, but also my work, which is kind of talking back to all these images that I'm looking at as an unintended audience, really. So through my lens-based work and research, I'm interested in film, photography, and multimodal arrangements that contemplate and materialize more of a multi-sensorial vocabulary to reflect about heritage and contemporary everyday life. So the works that I've shown you are kind of a bit of my process of how I've been shifting and thinking about how can I bring my own kind of coming together of thoughts, but also bringing it in a way that would intervene and would not bring this promise of something finished or something perfect of this one narrative kind of idea, but would offer space for you yourself to engage more actively than cinema, rather that you would just sit and receive and contemplate maybe differently. There's much more to say of all of the works, but I'm gonna leave it till here. Thank you very much.
好，那接下来看到的最后一件作品呢，是我比较近期的作品，2020年所做的 Unintended Audience。那刚才看到的 Moments 这件作品是2012年做的。那时隔8年之后呢，我又再度的回去重看这些我刚才过去提到的一些历史素材，但是在过程里面，其实我们有一些新的发现跟新的想象。刚才提到的荷兰的加勒比海地区总共有大概有6个不同的岛屿。那在6个不同的岛屿当中的时候，这些岛屿上面都会有这些不同的素材，各位在画面上看到，他们可能是比如说记录当地的农地啊，或者当地的荷兰的王室，他们去造访当地的时候的一些记录。可是其实我们个别岛屿的民众过去的时候看不到其他5个岛屿他们的这些历史素材，反而是我到了荷兰去念书之后，在他们的资料库里面看到这些不同来自于不同荷兰加勒比海地荷属加勒比海地区的这些岛屿上面的素材。那各位看到这些素材之后呢，我经过重整之后把它定制在这画面上，各位看到也许会看到有些的相似之处、相异之处，同时我在背景上面也加了不同的声响，各位听到的是音乐。如果各位听得懂语言的话，其实背后的这些内容其实跟政治的内容很有关系，所以我把这些过去的历史影像跟这个歌曲并置在一起之后， 候，创造一种冲突，让大家能够去不断的反思过去的历史，还有如何去观看他们，以及你在不同的媒介上面获得的冲击。那这就是我过去几年当中的时候，依据这个历史，然后依据我自己对于这个影像还有这个摄影的兴趣之后，去创造出了这个多媒介跟多重模式的安排，希望大家能够去看到这种多重感官的语汇，也去思考我们在这现代的日常生活，尤其是当代日常生活当中的时候，有哪些过去的影响依然留存在我们的身上跟我们的周遭。这就是我自己在思考如何在这个环境，在这个世界里面去生活，还有所在所居的地方的面对的话题跟面对的想象。但在过程里面的时候，当然就跟过去大家所习惯这个纯粹看电影的方式不同了。因为看电影的时候就是电影播放，然后你坐在这边去收看、阅听，还有去接收，也许是思考等等。但是在我的创作当中，我希望大家能够用更主动的方式，能够去介入，进而去意识还有去了解这个所谓的身份认同有什么样的可能性，有什么样不同于这个单一的论述，有哪些不同论述的基础。那在这样的脉络当中的话，这是我创作的历程。那每个作品其实它有更多细节可以跟大家分享。不过呢，那之后我们可能我们在讨论的时候可以再进一步的叙述。那我在这一部分的分享就到这边告一段落，谢谢大家。伟伦在开声音哦。
很谢谢那个Sharelly的分享，因为我自己在前面做就是去看你们过去的作品的时候，其实没有办法第一时间或是很清晰的了解你整个创作的脉络。我觉得从刚才这样听下来，你有介绍你前面自己在做自己的 footage 家庭的影像，然后去处理自己的认同的问题，然后后来再接到你最近的那件作品，对我来说它其实是一个很完整的在探讨一个影像对个人跟整个集体社会的关系。
So thank you, Sharelly, for your presentations. That before I study, I actually do not have a full pictures about your works and individuals and how they related to each other. But after your presentation, I think we can see a very clear images, clear narratives, like how you try to use, for example, home videos and historical legacy and video images in order to construct a different perspective about identity and or a collective or personal identity.
然后我觉得我可以先问几个问题，就是在那个 Chris 先进行之前，其实我对你的作品其实也有一些问题想要问你，就比如说像你前面影像，其实用家庭的影像，它用了蛮多都是动态的影像，或者是你在前面其实有做纪录片啊，因为纪录片的我们知道它的语言其实跟我们一般很多看到的录像可能有点不一样，因为纪录片很强调这种客观性的问题。那比如说你刚才最后讲到这件作品，它是用很多静态的影像去组成的，我也蛮好奇说你为什么会想要透过这种方式去组成它的影像的呈现的方式。
So before we move to Christoher, maybe I have a question for Sharelly. And in your previous work in Moments, you used a lot of home videos and a lot of moving images as well in your narratives. And of course, that has a huge influence from your documentary perspective or history. And of course, that's a very different perspective from documentary, because when we are producing documentaries, sometimes we want to provide a very objective perspective to present how everything goes. But in the latest work, The Unintended Audience, you use a lot of still images to compose the videos that we show. So can you tell us more about how you try to present the images or a whole ideas based on what you have collected or what you have seen in the personal archive in your latest work, The Unintended Audience?
So both, I think, both have follow a particular documentary tradition in itself. And so in Moments, indeed, it's a mix of archive footage, my own filming, and my mother's filming. But in The Unintended Audience, which is the last one, I really worked with the images of the archive itself fully, but kind of rework them in a different image. what the voiceover, and also the song completely each bringing a different layer to what you're seeing. The images that you see, so there are 6 pertaining to each documentation that has been done on each of the islands that were part of the Dutch Caribbean, or are a part of the Dutch Caribbean. And but I think for me, both are undoing a particular objectiveness in it. And that's every time that there's something that the works have in common, in that yes, it uses, but it also undoes. I don't know if I
我的作品当中，其实一直延续着某一种纪录片的传统，是我自己所延续出来的传统。但的确，在 Moments 前面早期这部作品当中的时候，我混合了很多我母亲拍摄的录像，那我自己拍摄的影片，还有过去历史的影片之后，把它重组跟建构出来。那在后来最新的这部作品 Unintended Audience 当中的时候，我完全就是使用来自于这个档案库里面的记录的录像跟画面。那各位在画面当中看到6个不同的缩图的话，这6个缩图就来自于6个不同的河属安地列斯或者河属加勒比海地区这些岛屿上面的录像的画面。那我透过了不同的剪辑跟拼凑的方式，让大家去颠覆人们对于这些传统河属安地列斯或河属加勒比海的这些岛屿的印象跟画面。所以再加上了我后来就在使用了这个音乐等等，又加上另外一个层面之后，让大家能够去重新的去观看这些画面，同时去颠覆这些画面过去想要去呈现的观点。
那我其实也蛮好奇，就是比如说你在用这个像刚我们看到的最后一件作品，它其实用了一个我们会觉得它有一种加勒比海情境的一种氛围的音乐，但是在这个影像的内容跟这个文字上，你是怎么去想它的对应的关系？因为它未必是这个影像的注解，但是这个我很好奇，这个文字你是怎么生产出来的，或者是你在制作这个影像或是这个文字的叙述的时候，你有没有想象一个它可能会朝向某个什么样的概念，或是你在重新思考的东西是对应的对象是你刚才讲到的帝国主义啊，或者这个荷兰他们过去在书写你们加勒比海地区的历史的问题吗？
So from our perspective as people outside of the Caribbean, when we watch this latest work, The Unintended Audience, we hear the very stereotypical Caribbean music. And at the same time, we saw different archival images and videos in front of us. And we also see a text, a subtitle in some ways, or text underneath of it. So how do you try to compose the image and correlate the images and the text that we are seeing and the music that we are hearing? Are you trying to respond to the colonial perspective, colonial gaze, or you try to subvert the ideas that we learn from those images?
So in presenting, I'm not presenting the images as the way they were shot. So it's difficult to read or to kind of visualize them because they're put in small. They put collectively. So the sound is being removed as well. I replaced the sound completely. And in the text, it's me talking to you. So I'm responding with my voiceover text. I'm talking, and I'm very well aware throughout all my works that I'm partially in control, right? So if you have no idea of what you're seeing, what these images are, if you're listening to the music, maybe you're gonna, oh, nice, and then that you just enjoy the music, which is also kind of perfectly fine. So everyone will kind of engage with the work differently and kind of turn on the way certain interests that they have. And I completely am aware that some people will kind of really be also saddened by the images, and some people will worry less and be like, oh, okay, this is it. And some be like, okay. The text also changes up and turns into smiley faces, and so it does kind of these things in between. So I'm not trying to kind of have one aim. I know that there are different audiences, but I am speaking back in different ways. And so I've already happened that people who are working in the archives have mailed me and be like, oh, I came up into your work and that's really great. So while they're reviewing all these other images, they come across this one, which is kind of talking back and giving another perspectives on someone who's watching these images that's from those or that knows those islands or is living on those islands, and that's kind of cool in a way. So yeah.
在这个作品当中，各位看到这些的来自于过去殖民时期的影像，其实是经过缩小的，所以也许各位看的不是那么清楚。另外一方面是我把这些所有在过去的这些历史影像当中的声音都直接都排除了，然后加入了过去这个我们你刚才提到这个刻板主义里面，刻板印象里面比较像是加勒比海这种热带的音乐等等。那这底下看到的文字内容，这底下像是字幕的文字内容，则是我的观点。那我在诉说这件事情，我在回应这些影像等等，所以每个人在看到这个作品的时候，也许会有不同的切入角度或者是着重的角度。有些人可能看到那画面之后会觉得很难过，因为这是过去殖民时期的影响。那有些人可能完全没有在看画面，只听到音乐，觉得这音乐听起来很舒服啊，很开心，然后觉得很享受。那有些人可能看到我的文字之后，就开始去看看到底我的文字如何去对应了这些画面等等，所以每个人的观点我并没有一个特定的角度必须要让大家能够去看到这些作品，而是提供一些不同的观点。那这个作品呢，其实后来也纳入到这个荷兰的这个国家影像的资料库里面，所以也有一些研究人员他们在回顾这些的过去的这个殖民的影像的时候，无意间看到了我的作品，然后有一些不同的想象，也让他们对于他们在看到这些殖民的画面或者是历史画面的时候，也开始有不同的观点跟想象。所以我觉得这是很好的、很有趣的一种方式，让大家能够用多元的角度跟多元的媒介去认识到这些画面跟作品。
然后前面其实 Sharelly 还有提到一件事情，我自己也蛮有感觉，就是我们其实蛮常在谈这个影像的问题的时候，比如说我们看到新闻或是大众媒体，它好像都会想要透过一种方式去形塑，或是让我们感觉这个世界是什么样的。但其实相对来说，我常常会觉得艺术作品或是我们以前看到的绘画，我们早期没有这些大众媒体的时候，其实我们是透过艺术作品去理解我们过去发生什么事，或是我们在书写艺术史的时候会去看这些艺术作品反映了当时的情境。那我其实不确定说你自己在做这些创作的时候，你是有意识到其实艺术作品它具有一种可以保留某个时空背景的一个状态吗？还是你是在后来慢慢去发展出你要去直接透过作品去处理历史的问题？
So in your works, you also mentioned about, for example, how media or mass media or news media is trying to present a certain place or certain incidents from their perspective, or they try to tell us how to understand the historical incidents, or how to understand certain area or regions. Before we have videos in the past, we try to analyze the context through paintings or through sculpture. And so our works in some ways are able to preserve or contain a certain context or certain histories for people in the later periods to understand and try to analyze. When you are working on your works, do you also take advantage of this material or this medium that it is able to capture certain context in your works, so for people later on can also see a certain periods and certain context from certain perspective?
I'm not sure if I understand. So if with my medium, I also try to preserve, can you maybe ask the question again?
要不要再阐述一下你的问题？
就是其实你早期你在用你自己的，就比如说家庭拍摄的影像的时候，它其实也是某种程度在透过你自己的角度去看这个世界嘛。然后我觉得我们在看过去在没有这些大众媒体的时候，其实艺术作品很常是我们在诠释整个或是我们要去看过去发生什么事很重要的一个媒介。那你自己在后来发展成你去直接回应这些历史影像，或是你去重新去叙述它的时候，你有意识到说其实 艺术作品它其实也具有某种可以重新去诠释历史的一个很重要的一个方法。
So for example, in moments, you are using home videos, videos from your mothers or from yourself to capture the Caribbean region that you saw at the time. And that's the Caribbean that people like us in Asia or in Taiwan were not able to see that in the past. So that's a new perspective to us, or a new way of understanding Caribbean to us. So, and I think that in that way, our works have the possibilities and capabilities to provide a new perspective, or provide or preserve a certain period of Caribbean. For example, when we go to Caribbean today, maybe we will not be able to see what you have captured at that time, back in the day. So when you create those works, do you intentionally try to preserve or capture or keep the certain period of time in your works?
Yeah, no, definitely. So in my awareness of so I'm very much concerned about this this lineage. Even though I'm speaking back or I'm interrupting, I know that whatever I'm making is within a particular time, and is reacting towards what's happening in the world, the change, the political change of the status of each of the islands, for instance. This idea of I might be there are not many people that identify as Dutch Antillean, so to speak. So because now it's really about each individual island and representing that identity. So my work in itself kind of speaks to this broader umbrella, a collective identity that was kind of being created then. And so I definitely think that I will the works addresses certain periods and that later on will change, and when you look back it kind of brings it in. The additional layer that I'm trying to bring in is that I'm not doing it in a way that's making any promises as such, right? Or try to be as intentional as possible, of not reproducing, and even in reusing or bringing in certain materials that I found, not just kind of displaying it, but kind of thinking about, okay, I'm also using it from my own point of view, and I think that is a nice thing about the digital media, that you're able to kind of this preserve to a certain extent, because I mean the hard disk and the ways we're storing all these digital media is also changing very rapidly. So I don't know how long that will be preserved either.
当然我比如说在 Moments 那个作品里面的时候，我当时拍摄的内容跟我当时呈现的观点，还有就我们去讨论这个所谓荷属安第列斯或荷属加勒比海这样的认同，其实到了现在的时候可能就已经不存在了，或开始转变了。这6个不同的岛屿，他们现在开始有各自不同的身份认同的产生，他们所认知的身份认同就不再是所谓的荷属加勒比海这样的认同。所以的确我们的这个作品当中会去呈现跟保留出过去历史的某一个段落、某一个观点跟某一个时空背景下，我们想要去讨论的这个身份认同的议题。那另外一方面是我在这呈现作品的时候，也并不只是单纯的把这个历史影像放在各位眼前而已，而是我自己用我的角度去揉捏或者是拼凑或剪辑出特定的历史的内容角度而已。所以这样的情况之下，其实我也是在用我自己当时当代当下的想法是去回应了这些历史内容，所以的确每个作品当中它都去呈现了当时的人们在那个当下还有那个时期时空背景下对于这些作品还有这些历史画面的回应。不过至于能够保存多久的话，其实这个媒材跟媒介其实一直在快速的变化，我们现在使用的硬碟啊，或者是这个使用的档案格式等等，能够在保存多久也不得而知，也许很快这些东西会被另外的档案格式或者另外的媒介所取代。
好的，那先谢谢 Sharelly 的分享。那等一下我们就先交给 Chris。那等一下 Chris 要试一下他的分享画面，那就是大家稍微我们才有确认一下。
Okay, so thank you, Shirley, for the moments. And now we'll move on to Chris, and we'll let Chris to try if you can present or project your screen onto the slide.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Sharelly. And so I'm going to try. I'm not really sure. What are you all seeing now?
Not yet.
Me?
Just you. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll start all over again. So I do present, and then I do share screen, and this is where it sort of gives me a little challenge. Okay.
那在
Right.
Chris 分享的时候，我稍微分享一下我自己在准备这个过程看到的，跟我自己觉得我们常在谈影像的问题。好。
Okay, sure. Chris, you can continue to try, and we'll talk about his experience while preparing to talk to you and what kind of images. Oh, we're now seeing your presentation now. If you go to full screen, yes, we can see it now.
Oh, okay. Where? Okay. That's y'all are seeing it, or I'm seeing it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Oh wow. Now y'all are presenting this, or I don't have any control, right? This is coming from y'all.
I think this is from MoCA.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
All right. Okay. Well,
you can just tell her like to next file, next page, they will do it.
Okay. Well, for my I kind of like the fact that I'm beginning with this image in the context of the conversation y'all are having.
Yeah, you can go on. Yeah.
Oh, so how long should I speak for to give?
You know better than I do, so I will let you decide when to pause.
Okay. Well, I just want to introduce. I'll start with this first image.
Mm-hmm.
I like the fact that this is the first image because of the conversation I was listening to between Sharelly and yourselves, particularly around stereotypical images and what images mean to different people. Like the Caribbean means one thing to us and it means something to other people. And in fact, a lot of Caribbean work is involved in that negotiation. So this was one of the very first works I showed when I returned to the Caribbean from art school at the sort of end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. And what it is a fragment of a postcard of an idyllic tropical setting by a popular genre painter. And but it's also a small clipping from the newspaper. It was a description of a murder. And so what I was juxtapositioning is the kind of actual circumstances that we live under. And because you can die on a beautiful day, a nice sunny day in the tropics, you can drown in the sea. When you're looking at Hollywood movies, it's always raining when there's a funeral, which always puzzled me as a child. Because funerals can happen on days when the sun is very hot, wars can happen, crises can happen. But also, I put it in a very gaudy gold frame, which defines sort of like the pictorial field, the field of expectations. And this had to do with myself being a young artist at the time and what societies like that demand of artists, to sort of talk about our beauty. And the concept of the tropics and the concept of tropical beauty is a product that came after sugarcane, on the road to tourism and so forth. So it's a very tiny work because the little fragment of text is fundamentally it's one column from the newspaper, from a broadsheet newspaper. Thus, the size of the little fragment is cut out from the post. It's almost like a specimen, that fits in a glass that you put under a microscope. It's that small. It's probably like about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, and it's put in this little tiny ends of gold frames. And it talks about all these ironies. The title of the work is very interesting to me. It was called Wait, Dorothy, Wait. It was a song by a popular calypsonian, Black Stalin, in which he was talking about the recession of the 80s and wanting to go and party and have a good time. But every time he starts getting dressed to leave the house, he starts thinking about all the difficult political circumstances.
Okay.
好，各位看到这第一件作品，我也很高兴的，我们能够把这个画面当做第一件作品。这个作品呢，其实各位看的画面，这个尺寸非常的小，大概的画面本身的话，大概只有3-4公分左右，这个的长度跟宽度而已。那这个作品是我当时80年代末90年代初刚刚回到加勒比海地区时候做的作品。这个画面里面会看到的影像呢，是从一张明信片上面剪下来的。那这个画面呢，在描述当然就是加勒比海的一些热带风情、热带风光啊，这种符合大家刻板印象的画面。那底下搭配的文字呢，则是我从报纸上面剪下来的简报。那一段的文字里面在描述的是当地发生的一起谋杀案。所以呢，让各位想象的是，其实在我们这个刻板印象所描绘的热带岛屿上面，也可能会有不同的社会事件的社会现实正在发生当中。那同时间，我拥有了一个非常金碧辉煌的这个，好像画作的一些画作的画框一样，把它裱框起来之后，呈现在大家面前。所以这就是我们当时所面对一个非常矛盾的情况。那一方面，我们这些艺术家回到加勒比海之后，大家就会期望你能够去叙述跟描述、介绍一下加勒比海这些美感啊，或者这些美丽的风光跟风情。但是我们面对到现实，可能往往并不是如此。就好像我们每次在看到那个好莱坞电影里面的时候，那个这些丧礼总是下着大雨，我每次看到这些画面，觉得很困惑，就是为什么丧礼一定要发生在下雨天等等。所以这些不同的矛盾冲突都同时发生在我们的眼前。那我用这样的尺寸的话，也刻意的好像去呈现出这是像是一个标本一样，透过这个标本，我们试图去了解跟看待加勒比海。毕竟对于每个人来说，对于加勒比海的人来说，或对于其他地区的人来说，所谓的加勒比海可能会让大家想象到不同的画面，会有不同的刻板印象等等。那至于这次作品的里面当时使用的这个作品的名称呢，其实是来自于80年代的一位歌手他的歌曲的名称。那这位80年代的歌手，这首歌曲当时在描述的是，在那样的一个经济不景气的情况之下，他还是想要出去玩，出去参加派对等等。可是当他准备开始打扮的时候，正要出门时，又会想到在当时那个社会里面，同时有很多生活困顿啊，很多挑战等等。所以那首歌也在讲的是个人的享乐跟社会现实之间的矛盾。我觉得应用在这个作品当中非常的切题。
I'll try to give shorter sentences.
No worry.
I feel like I'm overworking you, Leonard.
No worry.
That's a lot to remember. So, could you go to the next slide?
下一页，谢谢。
All right, and the next.
下一页。
So, so I wanted to show these very early works. These were done in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. So this is a pair of burglar bars, but used to become a pair of glasses. And it's talking about, I suppose, vantage points. What side are you on? Are you on the outside looking in or the inside looking out? And it's talking about notions of security and ways of seeing the society, right? I found it deeply ironic that people were decorating their burglar bars. But I think we find this in many societies around the world, and what are the implications of it?
那这是我在90年代做的作品，也是创作早期的作品。那各位看到的是，好像一个监狱的监牢的这个画面，或者这个铁窗的画面。那我们其实台湾也很多，就是大家的窗外面都有很多的铁窗的这个窗花的样子。那 在讨论的其实是不同的观点，就是到底呢你是从外面看进去还是从里面看出来，那在不同的角度当中可能会看到完全不一样的视野。
Yes. And let's go to the next slide.
下一页。
So in this period, I had, even though I was trained to be a painter, I went to art school to study painting. I had a background in design. I started thinking about whether I should make things at all. Because as you can tell from the first two works, one was a collage. The second one was something that I worked with a jeweler to have made. And then this work, I started thinking of performative gestures. So this was a performance in which I had a conversation with a shirt. The shirt is the typical shirt that politicians of a certain era wore, somewhere between the Nero shirt and the Guayabera. All politicians of a certain era wore their shirts. What fascinated me about this one, which was mine, that I found in the closet by my parents from the mid-70s, is that it was made out of suit material, but it had all the epaulets and the pockets of the kind. So it looked a little bit like Prince Philip because of the blue suit material, but it also looks like Che Guevara and Fidel because of the pockets and the epaulets. And I wanted to have a conversation with this shirt to talk about a kind of ideological period that we had gone through in the 70s. So it was a conversation with a shirt jack about art. And it was a homage to people like Boyce and David Hammons. And because to my mind, those two artists, were asking questions about, I suppose, how objects and actions could have the same agency in the social space. So my training as an artist in the era in which painting was considered to be sort of the pinnacle of that kind of thing, I was in a sense defying that, just as I was defying expectations with the gaudy gold frames and the pictorial image. Yeah.
这也是我在创作初学的作品，但我其实当时去艺术学校的时候念的是绘画。那我过去曾经有一些设计的背景。各位刚才看两件作品，一个是拼贴的作品，那另外一个是我跟珠宝商合作之后打造出来的这个客制化的眼镜框的作品。那其实在这个作品里面，现在各位看到画面是一件行为艺术作品。我自己呢在跟墙上挂的这件衣服做对话。这个衣服的式样呢其实是加勒比海当时某一个时期当中政治人物都会穿的这个短袖衬衫的样式。那我自己是在我自己的爸妈家的这个衣柜里面翻出我自己70年代中期的时候也有一件这样的衣服。这个衣服呢是用类似西装材质所剪裁的，但是有一些不同的口袋。那所以那个口袋的材质跟样式会让你想到比如说切格瓦拉或者是特定的这个政治人物他们的形象，但是那个材质就会让你感觉好像有比较正式，好像皇族或贵族的这个式样。所以我在这样的这个行为艺术表演当中的时候，跟这个这些衣服之间产生的对话呢，在讨论的是特定的意识形态、特定的时期的时候，到底艺术能够发挥什么样的角色？因为在很多时候我们都会思考的是，到底这些艺术作品或者是物件或者是很多的行为能不能有它自己的主体性。那我也希望在这个作品里面去讨论到在这样的时空背景之下的时候，到底艺术会赋予什么样的期望，而我们是不是能够去挑战跟颠覆人们对我们的期望。就好像我们刚才看到那个金色的画框，好像应该表框的是一个非常重要的作品，但其实里面是明信片跟简报。我都透过不同的行动去挑战跟颠覆大家对于一般艺术的想象。
Yeah, it was a very strange performance for which I did not prepare. And what was interesting is that the audience eventually interrupted and took over and started talking to the shirt as well. I've always liked this photo because even though I'm analyzing or interrogating the shirt, my body language and posture in the chair looks like I'm being interrogated. So it's by the shirt. So it's a deeply ironic encounter.
这我一直很喜欢这张照片，是因为其实当时这个行为艺术表演并没有特殊的预测或预期。那后来我们在这个行为艺术进行的过程当中的时候，后来观众也开始打断我，然后介入之后，他们也开始跟这件衣服产生不同的对话。那我喜欢这件作品，这张照片的原因是因为我这个作品本来是我试图要去叩问或者是诘问或者是拷问这件衣服，但是在这张照片当中的时候呢，反而我从我的姿势看起来好像我才是那个被拷问的人。
Next slide.
下一页。
I did a number of gestures kind of reaching into my background in design. So we use this kind of carbolic soap at home, blue soap. It's mythologically, it's supposed to cleanse things, give extra cleansing. So what I did is I redesigned the label for the bar of blue soap and then left them in the supermarket, which confused people because it had no price. So I don't know who has them, but I basically, bought the soap, changed the label, and put it back in the supermarket in a few places, and it, it just talks about all the kind of colonial anxieties about purity, cleanliness, and superstition and so on.
这件作品呢，其实运用我自己的设计背景，我就是到超市里面去买了这些肥皂，还有他们的外包装之后呢，经过重新设计之后，把外包装改掉之后，再重新放回到超市里面。然后因为上面没有标价，我相信有些人看到之后可能会不知所措，然后我也不知道后来到底是谁把这个肥皂带走。所以基本上在讨论的是，在过去的殖民时期的时候，我们都认为肥皂当然有这个清洁的功能。那当然很多时候殖民时期对我们的这些意识形态的灌输跟教育呢，都是认为我们要去净化，要追求这个干净啊、洁净，比较更进化的这个思维跟逻辑想象等等。所以这个是我当时去挑战殖民制度的这个想法。
Next slide.
下一页。
So next slide.
下一页。
Next slide.
再下一页。
Okay. So what I didn't know at the time was in the investigating of how, gestures or performances and the making of things would sort of shape my future career. This is very early work. This is 1993, 1994. This piece was shown in the Havana Biennial, and it was a multi-channel video. But try to imagine how difficult it is to do a work like that then. It talk about because what it's going on, it's 4 videos. It's one video on 4 screens, but the videos are all like 2 minutes behind the other, because what I'm trying to do is kind of create a sonic experience, and visual and sonic experience. And so all the TVs are playing at the same time, and with 2 sound levels. So it's almost like standing in a marketplace, and you have to choose what you want to focus on. It's much easier in the era in which we live now to sort of develop works like this, but at this time it was very laborious, and it actually, when I'll jump forward from here, but I just thought I would say this kind of defines my re-entry into the Caribbean. At that time, the conventional artists of the day just felt I was indulging in gimmicks, and that I was doing this because I'd wasted all this time in art school and didn't learn to paint and draw properly.
这是我另外一个在早期实验的作品，这是在93、94年所创作的作品，当时曾经在哈瓦那双年展，古巴的哈瓦那双年展展出。那各位可以想象，在当时的古巴要去呈现这样的录像作品，或者是这样的一个艺术作品是有多么不容易。这个作品当中呢，其实是各位看到有4个不同的荧幕，他们4个不同的荧幕里面呈现的是同样的一个录像，可是每一个录像的时间差2分钟，所以呢，各位观众站在中间的时候呢，就同时在4个方向会有4个不同的声音同时对你传送出来，然后画面呢的速度也不尽相同。这种情况之下，就好像你真的身在市集里面，你要去自己去选择应该要去 专注在哪一个画面、哪一个音源，才能够听到里面真正的声音。那这个东西呢，我后来其实当时也没有意识到这些的录像作品或者是行为艺术作品会影响到我后来的这个创作生涯的发展。因为当时我重新回到加勒比海的时候，做这些作品的时候，很多的这些主流艺术家或者当时的社会可能觉得我花了这么多的时间去艺术学校里面学绘画，结果到最后呢一事无成，什么也画不出来，也设计不出来，只会做这些看起来像花招的事情。
Yeah. Next slide. So at that time, I kind of got intimidated by video technology because it was not as accessible and as easy as it is now. You know, things took 2 and 3 days to render. The technology was expensive, you know, so you didn't know if you should go for broadcast level or if you should go for home video level. But during that entire process, I was drawing a lot. And a lot of the drawings were like plans for gestures and ideas I may implement live or implement for, you know, for video production ideas. They were like storyboards. What I didn't know is that the drawing process would almost stand on its own, separate from my sort of forays into video and performance. And this earlier work dealt a lot with sort of like the relationship between development and violence. Because in the narrative of sovereignty and freedom is also kind of regulatory modes, you know, that are demanded, especially of the artist, especially of the individual. And so it's a kind of an ironic positionality.
Okay. Did you hear Leonard?
抱歉，刚才声音断掉了。好，那各位看到的是我当时所做的这些很多的行为录像艺术之前的这些准备工作的画面，还有这个素描稿。那很多时候呢，我并不是很确定这些素描稿到最后有没有办法成真，能不能够真正作为行为艺术或录像艺术等等。因为当时录像艺术的成本非常的高，你可能要花很多的时间才有机会，或者很高成本才有机会把它做出来。所以这些的画面，但是虽然说也许未必后来真正成为录像艺术或行为艺术，但是帮助我在这个过程里面去思考不同的想象跟内容。那主题的时候，很多事都跟发展还有暴力有关系，因为这些我们当地的社会在追求自由的时候，很多时候不论是艺术家或一般人民反而会受到很多的约束跟规范。那在追求自由跟落实规范之间，我觉得这就是非常讽刺的一种对比。
Okay, so for the person handling the slides, the images, you can just go through them, you know, a couple seconds in each, and then stop at 118, slide number 118.
那接下来的话，那就是请于勋你们就是开始一张一张跳，隔几秒钟跳一张下一张，然后慢慢的往前跳，让大家看一下这些不同的作品。
Yes, really quickly, just go through them and stop at 118.
对，几张就给就是让大家看一下画面就好了。等一下到了大概110几张的时候再停下来，118张。
So what I'm showing is a number of experiments with drawing, with symbolism, with different kind of vocabularies to talk about sort of like the experience of growing up in the Caribbean, but also as I started traveling more from the mid-90s on, I started investigating how, as a Caribbean person, I see the world around me. Because even though the Caribbean is seen as a very specific location, you know, words like isolated and island comes up, but so much of what constitutes Caribbean experience is central to sort of like the whole global project. of sort of global, transnational capitalism, extraction, the transportation of human bodies, so I kind of did a number of experiments in different locations in which I tried to understand my way of seeing the world coming from my own experience. If any of these images capture your attention, I could go back to them if they need explanation, but I want to talk a little bit about what led to the work I'm doing that's being presented in Taipei. So when you stop on slide 118, maybe Leonard could just translate what I just said, and then I will start talking about what led to where I am now.
各位看到的这些画面是我历年来所做的一些不同的实验跟实践。一般人们在想到加勒比海的时候，当然在想到的是比如说孤立啊，很多的岛屿、群岛的画面等等。那对于当地的民众而言，也许是完全不一样的想象。我自己来自于加勒比海，那历程当中的时候，从90年代开始，也有更多前往不同地区的经验。那就开始在思考到底加勒比海的民众是如何看待这个世界的。所以各位看到在不同的地点，我做了不同的实验之后，试图去呈现我的自己成长在加勒比海的这个历程当中的时候有什么样的经验，然后呢我们所看到的加勒比海是什么样的画面。因为一般人想象加勒比海的时候也许是岛屿，可是我们在论述加勒比海的时候，不免俗的或大多数的时候，其实都是放置在一个全球的脉络之下，不论是全球的资源的掠夺，或者是全球人货之间的流通，或者是殖民的时候这些人口被流通，或者是被带到不同地方的经验。所以这是我之前过去的一些不同的想象，那这些想象也影响了我最后也是后来在目前在台北当代馆所展现的这件作品的背景。
How far we are from that? Okay. Yeah, you could speed up a bit.
好，可以再加速一点。
You will also notice in a lot of the work I use rubber stamps, paper clips, almost looking like, it's because my first studio was in my parents' office. My parents were civil servants, and their dream was for me to become a respectable civil servant. So I found myself using the arsenal, the arsenal of the equipment of bureaucracy to kind of do creative investigation, which I find to be deeply ironic.
这也是另外一个我在作品的特色。各位看到我早期的作品里面用了很多的图章、印章，还有长尾夹。那是因为我其实第一个工作室是在我爸妈的办公室。那我爸妈过去是公务员，他们最大梦想就是我有一天能够成为就是备受他人尊敬的公务员。所以我就用了很多公务员会用的这些工具，比如说印章啊、长尾夹等等，去做艺术创作，感觉好像也发挥了某一种公务员角色的样子。
I can just go through and then stop on 118. I'll start. Are we at 118 yet? Yeah. I'll just go. Okay, I'll start talking a little bit. Yeah, so at this I just made a big leap from the early 90s through the 2000s, and we are getting to sort of to 2013, 2014, which is when I will stop on slide 118, because what I was thinking about a lot is that very often when the Caribbean comes up in conversations, a lot of, stop right here, yeah, and a lot of, go back one.
上页。
Yeah, this one. Yeah, very often, no, right.
因为刚刚下一页，对，这页听的。
Yeah, so this is a crazy situation here. This is me locked up in a studio in Chicago, and I am swinging gas nozzles, And because in my teenage years, I grew up going to see, films by Run Shaw, with Carter Wong and Alexander Fusheng, what we used to call kick-ups, which are Chinese, kung fu films. So I started thinking about male contests, the B-movie male spectacle. And I locked myself up in the studio and I was swinging around gas nozzles. So it looked like almost like the carters you see at the beginning of those movies, where they kind of, the stars come up and they do all kinds of moves with, and so because I was thinking a lot about multinationals and oil and the global sort of contest, because, that's how the Caribbean began. And around that time, so I didn't know what I was doing. And this is where my practice has gone. What you saw was a lot of experiments with making things and drawings and notebooks and projects. So you can go to the next slide. And the next. Next slide. Right. And what happened is I started thinking I wanted to take some guys out onto the beach. This is Lake Michigan. It's not the Caribbean. And I wanted them to play around with the gas nozzles. I tried to work with the theater department. It was impossible. They wanted me to workshop it and do all kinds of things. So these are just two guys from the office. I take them out onto the beach and I give them gas nozzles and they start playing around. Next slide. And it just became this bizarre male spectacle. At the time, I had seen this movie by the Japanese director. Was it called Sonatine? Where a bunch of yakuza have a caper the next day and they play games with each other on the beach like children, like brats. But of course, when I staged this event and went back and edited it, I realized that I was becoming more and more interested in like the contemporary world, because when people talk about the Caribbean, they get very nostalgic. They start talking about plantations and the 19th century. And I think in a lot of my work over the last couple of years, I've tried to get rid of those vocabularies. And even though they infer the foundational past, they talk about the contemporary present, which remains about transnational extraction and the politics around it.
各位刚才看到的画面，其实我们开始跳很多画面，从90年代一路跳到21世纪初，然后到了2013年、14年的时候的作品。那这个作品当的时候呢，各位看到我当时是身在一个美国芝加哥的一个艺术工作室当中，我当时就开始去试着去玩看这个加油枪。那当时在讨论的当然是全球化的问题、石油啊、资源掠夺的问题等等。那其实过程里面看到有各种不同的实验，不论是透过了绘画的实验、素描的实验，或者这些行为装置艺术上面的实验等等。那我本来那个时候的就到了这个地方在湖边，它在密西根湖边，并不是海边。但是我就找了2个那个工作室里面的同仁之后呢，把加油枪交给他们，让他们让这边就开始自由发挥，就看到留下来这些各位看到的画面。那当时我其实灵感是来自于我看了一部日本电影，当时日本电影里面描述就是有一群黑社会，他们在犯案之后呢，一群人到了海边之后开始很开心的跟孩子一样在海边游玩乐等等。那这个画面的时候，我也要去挑战的是人们对于这个所谓加油枪或资源掠夺的想象。那另外一方面是颠覆大家对于加勒比海的想象。一般人想要加勒比海就是有充满着各种怀旧的想法，夏日风情、热带风情等等。那我也试图去呈现出来了。我们讨论加勒比海的时候，也许可以不同于一般人对于刻板印象的想象。
Yeah. So just you can move forward. You can keep moving forward with the slides, because what happened at this time, I started drawing more and more, even though I'm doing these video projects. Because I kind of see the drawing as highly personal, and I see the video things as almost like public statements. And some of the drawings are almost like notebook. They're notations. They're made of text. And I talk about libelous things, but the irony of writing them down in black and white, but at the same time, they become difficult to read, even though they are logical sentences describing things that are happening in the social environment, and creating these worlds. And just really trying to work out the vocabularies of the era in which we find ourselves. I want to stop. Like this is a piece that just keep going. Don't just keep going. Yeah. It talks about being afloat, about rising water levels. And people being afloat. So there's a number of kind of experiments in which I'm just responding to the things I see and feel as I move around. I just saw this one day on the beach. How ironic, the Buddha, Shea, the American eagle, all floating on one beach, and it was a guy carving these things and selling them. But it's like a typical, but it comes back to that earlier image, the beach is a place where Columbus lands and starts to murder people, or it's a place where people go on holiday, or a place where there are battles or people launch ritual ships, for religious purposes and things like that. So, beaches are very complicated. Okay, I'll run through all of this and we will stop. As I said, if something captures your fancy. This is a piece where I built this red step, which is and it's something that anybody can make anywhere. And I go and work with them. And the step talks about the places we leave but never quite return to, because those are the shuttle steps that you see in the barrack housing on plantations. And often when the houses fall down in hurricanes or when people move from one estate to another, the step is all you find. And so I've done collaborations with different artists about these fragments of architecture that talk about colonial histories, but at the same time talk about the contemporary space. And because I like to think of people as being dispersed more than displaced. This is a project I started in Germany, just drawings. Talking about extraction. It's talking about the moment. Stop here. Maybe I'll let Leonard throw you and then I'll close off. I'm sure I'm running out of time. Yeah.
好，这边看到的是我刚才在过去这个2013年之后陆续几年所做的作品。那作品当中的时候，其实无非在探讨都是跟殖民主义还有全球化之间影响之下，到底加勒比海面对了什么样的情况。那我一直认为绘画其实是非常个人的事情。我在这个时期开始画很多的绘画，我觉得绘画是非常私密非常个人的事情，反而这些录像是一种好像是公开对外的宣示跟声明一样，所以我有很多自己的跟自己的对话，然后用绘画来表现出来。各位看到画面有一些可能是比如说在纸上面有很多的文字，但是文字上面的时候，其实文字串起来就好像一个生命体或有机体的一个描述的现象，或者是我各位看到在画面上面，这是在德国的创作的作品，或者是各位看到在海边的时候，海边其实是非常复杂的。海边到底对加勒比海人而言是比如说哥伦布当时登陆开始滥杀无辜的开始呢，还是当时很多的宗教仪式他们把船送出去的起点，或者是海边是一个人们去做观光度假旅游的地方，所以海边是具有非常复杂的一个元素的地方。那另外一点是各位看到有很多不同的建筑的元素在我的作品当中出现，因为我在探讨的是其实刚才包括这个红阶梯也是一样的逻辑，红阶梯只是人们想要去某个地方但是无法去到的地方，或者是无法回归的地方。那这个元素呢，其实我们看到在很多的比如说历史遗迹当中，或者是加勒比海经历过飓风的侵袭之后，很多的房子 子都不见了，到最后只剩下几节的阶梯。那就透过这个阶梯去讨论的是这些殖民历史的影响，还有当代社会当中所面对的情况，到底应该何去何从等等的问题。所以我常常会运用到这些的历史的物件，或者是这个殖民的遗绪下面的内容，可是其实讨论的是非常当代的问题。
So go back to slide 164.
好，回到刚才那个我们即将要介绍新的作品的，在当代馆里面呈现的这件作品的内容。
Right. So 164 was the one before.
好，前一页，谢谢。
Right. It kind of, that's the silicone bit head of when the drill enters the ground, going down through the plates to release oil into the atmosphere, right? And so I started this series of drawings for the Liverpool Biennial in which I talked about that moment of impact, because I find in oil economies, there's always violence. In other words, if you came to the Caribbean in the 18th century, it was violent because Europe was addicted to sugar. And of course, on this side of the planet, you all know about that kind of violence in the early 20th, in around the time of opium addiction. And we know the relationship between opium and the development of development of wealth of the European kingdoms, right? So there's a kind of way in which the drill bit entering the ground and the bullet entering the surface, cracking the layer of the skin, was that moment of impact, of turbulence, was something that I became very concerned about. And I will talk about that when we move on. If you move to the next slide, this is when I went to Sharjah. And so going back to where we started at the beginning of my presentation, I find myself getting to these new environments and trying to make sense of them. So when I went to Sharjah, what struck me was that a lot of the people that are working there and building this new kind of social space based on oil money are people from elsewhere, just as it was on the plantations in the Caribbean. So in terms of my process, I didn't really have a clear idea. I just thought I'll build a scaffolded, this very heterogeneous grid out in the middle of nature and see what happened. What I did not expect, next slide,
下一页，谢谢。
a bunch of children living in the area, we were interrupting them. This is their playground. They live there. So because I am also imported labor. I'm doing my art there, and I'm there to do work for the biennial. And these kids started photobombing the shoot. They were throwing stones at the drones. They were doing all kinds of crazy stuff. They kicked my photographer, and prank after prank. And so that when I got back to my studio in Port of Spain, I used all the offtakes of the pranks that these kids did for my video, because it started to talk about the dynamics of belonging and the kind of ridiculousness of, or almost Sisyphean gesture of building these things, kind of heterogeneous things out in nature. It's like a kind of human instinct to build these grids, and how futile or how suspect they may be or tragic they may be. So it brought up a lot of issues for me. And that is what formed the video that I kind of produce, how to respond to new environments. And the piece is called, Elsewhere's Beginnings and Endings, because while I was moving around in the Emirates, I started thinking about, what it might have been like to be in the Caribbean in the late, in the sort of early phases of when plantations and the land and everything was being organized to create profit and to build a European project, because of course it was built on sugar and slave labor and the murder of indigenous populations. So so I kind of wondered what are the prospects, and of course what is the most dangerous part of the world now with the most amount of war and conflicts, and it's because of oil and the addiction to oil. So I was thinking about all of those things. So I want to go to the next slide, the last slide. Right. So So these videos are kind of, next slide. These videos and these drawings. So the drawing is about that point of impact. These videos and these drawings are kind of where I am now, as I try to make sense of, what's going on around me. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
好，那各位这次看到的作品当中，其实都是源自于我近期的这些绘画。我在思考的是，到底有哪一些冲突点？冲突是因为接触而产生的。比如说，欧洲因为对糖业的迷恋跟执迷之后呢，发生了在加勒比海的很多冲突。亚洲的话，是因为比如说过去鸦片的关系造成了很多的冲突。在中东的话，就是因为石油的关系造成了冲突。那这些接触点就引爆了很多不同的冲突。那这一次在作品在台北当代馆看到这件作品当中的话，其实是源自于我到沙扎双年展当时准备要进行作品的时候的一些接触的经验。那我当时开始并没有很明确的想法，我想到现场之后去理解这个环境，所以当时准备去做一些像音架的结构跟架构。那在当地的时候，我就意识到跟了解到，其实很多当地的劳工都是来自于其他地方的移工。那我自己其实也是移工，到了沙加双年展之后去做作品。那我们在做作品的过程当中的时候，其实很多当地小朋友就因此入境啊，或者是可能捣蛋啊，比如说拿石头去丢无人机啊，或者是踢我的摄影师等等，对他们来说，我们所工作这个环境，其实它是他们生长游乐的地方，所以他们才是当地的主人。但是呢，在这个过程当中的时候，到底归属感是谁的？到底谁归属在这个地方？到底我们才是这个过程当中的主角，还是他们呢？所以后来我离开了这个沙加双年展之后呢，就回到了这个工作室里面，然后开始去剪辑，把这些小朋友入境的画面剪辑成我后来在各位这次作品里面、这次展览里面看到的作品。希望去呈现的是，其实在这样的一个接触跟过程当中会产生新的冲突，但是也会让我们看到，其实不同的人对于这个地方会有不同的认知的归属感。那这就是我现在的过程，各位现在的创作的角度跟观点，透过不同的环境之后，试图用不同的结构跟架构去理解这个环境，不论是透过刚才提到绘画的方式去了解不同的接触点跟冲突的来源所在，还有透过录像的方式去了解当地的民众跟这些外来者之间如何互动的变化。
Oh, so I think you all I don't know. I mean, I'm ready to open to questions and so on, because I think we could go back to a slide if somebody is interested. But I think, yeah. So let's.
好，我的介绍就在那边再告一段落。如果各位对于前面的作品或者是现在这个作品有任何问题的话，我也很乐意回答。好，伟伦交给你。伟伦，麦克风打开。
抱歉，忘记打。谢谢那个 Chris 的分享。我觉得，其实我觉得他的作品是有蛮多有趣的地方。是我之前在看那个他过去的座谈的影片的时候，其实他谈到蛮多关于在地的，就是一个地方的物件的跟全球流动的关系。那我其实蛮喜欢 Chris 他有一个概念，他是说，很多人可能会说全球化之后，可能某些地方开始跟着全球化了，可是他认为加勒比海本身就是全球化的。那我很想要知道说，你怎么自己去看你的这个概念跟你作品的关系？因为你好像是从某些物件开始去谈它在全球流动的状态嘛，有点像是你在那个录像里面，你也会去谈说，不同的人到某个地方的时候，它其实是从很多不同的国家组成的。那我想要请你再去多谈一点你的作品跟这些它在全球流动的这种状态的关系。
Okay, so when I study about your works, I've noticed that you talk about, for example, certain objects or certain people, how they travel or how they transport around the world, or Caribbeans is always talked about within a global context. So can you elaborate on that? For example, how you use to, in your works, how do you try to present those objects, those people? In this work, we saw that you try to talk about they are actually migrant workers from a different part of the world to Saja. And can you give us other examples about how you talk about object or people in this globalized world or globalized system?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tricky question, because I think we live, like there's a project I did some years ago called Little Gestures, and it had to do with these little sculptures that I made with rubber stamps. There was one on my desk a minute ago, but I must have tossed it. What did I do with it? Oh, here it is. It's a little sculpture. Right? And it's a rubber stamp. And if you go through my slides, you'll see that I have hundreds of them moving across the floor. But what struck me about that work was that I made it in 3 or 4 different locations. I'm talking about populations crossing borders, carrying their skills and dreams. You know, the bench actually is derived from a bench I bought from a child in Haiti. Right? It's a typical bench. Oh, sorry. I bought this bench from a street child who was shining shoes. It fits perfectly under the arm. And I thought that in terms of, but in every country you go to, you're going to find a bench like that, right? In the kitchen, in the garden, in a workshop. And I kind of wondered, what is the origin of that bench? Like, it means so many things to so many people in so many parts of the world, especially laboring societies, right? And but then when I started making the actual work, I had to make the rubber stamp, cut the paper. But then when I was in Johannesburg, the paper was imported from somewhere else. And then, so that the final version of this piece, where I have hundreds of them made in different countries, I don't quite know where all the paper comes from. I don't quite know, you know, so the piece is a reflection of labor conditions and people moving around. And very often, I find that confusion of place seems to be very much a part of sort of contemporary social reality. However, governments and regimes want to give us passports and visas and try to keep us in fixed locations. And even curatorial enterprises need us to be from somewhere, but this somewhere is not invented by us, it's invented by them, right? So that we can become readable. You know, so that, I mean, all societies deal with this, right? In different ways. But I think the Caribbean has a unique relationship to that construct because the Caribbean was created by people transplanted, and inherent in the formulation of the Caribbean is a kind of lie. A lie around expediency. In other words, when Columbus came into the Caribbean, he claimed to have discovered it, but the people helped him. They showed him where all the other islands were. They sent him on to other islands if they wanted to get rid of him. But he had to get more money to serve his expedition, right? So he would lie and say there were lions and tigers. And up to this day, the Caribbean, that is one misnomer. And then it's also called the West Indies because he was really looking for India, right? So the more he lied, the more money he got, and the more, you know, and so the Caribbean is a funny place where there's always a negotiation, an expedient negotiation around self, place, you know, it's quite unique in that regard, you know, especially in the context of global capitalism and people moving goods, services, and people around. I'm just suggesting, you know, in the context of your question.
离我的耳朵
其实在讨论的是，我们刚才看到这个作品上面有这个明信片，然后有印章还有长尾夹。其实在讨论的是人口跟跨界的问题。那这个印章，这个椅子，其实我在海地上面跟路边的一个小朋友他们买来的一张板凳。这板凳呢，其实非常的常见，它可能出现在厨房里面啊、花园里面啊、工坊里面，非常的常见。可是，在很多劳动社会里面，它有各自不同的问题。那我当时就做了这件作品之后呢，在其中一张画面，各位看到，其实有数百张这样的这个明信片，然后放在地上，然后列成一整排。 等等。我在不同的地方也曾经都做过这样的作品，去再现这个作品。我到南非的时候呢，其实一般而言我都会自己去剪裁那个纸张，然后自己盖印章之后自己去陈列出来。到南非之后呢，他们帮我准备了很多的纸，可是其实我并不知道那个纸到底来自于何处，等于说这些纸币的身份不明了。在讨论一个跟跨国有关的问题的时候，我使用的是来自于不明来源的这个纸张开始去做作品。那我讨论到是好像其实很多时候我们在世界各地都会有这种不知身在何处，就是没有归属感的问题。可是对于很多的国家政府或政权而言的时候，他们会开始发护照发签证给你，因为他们要希望透过这些的元素跟内容之后，让你可以成为可以辨识的一份子，那让我们进而去建构出他们的国家里面的人口到底是什么样的面貌等等。我觉得这是一个非常值得探讨的问题，尤其是在加勒比海地区，因为加勒比海这个概念其实我觉得就是建构在一个巨大的谎言当中。当时加勒比海哥伦布发现这个地方的时候呢，就宣称他说谎说他发现了这个地方，但其实当地很多民众帮助他很多。他回去到欧洲之后，为了要去赞助他的更多探险的经费，他也做了另外一个谎言，说加勒比海有狮子啊，有老虎啊，等等等等等等的。那很多时候呢，他一整个加勒比海的发展历程其实都建构跟源自于这个谎言。然后在这个过程里面，其实我觉得加勒比海特别的有意思，是因为这些谎言后来建构了我们所认知的加勒比海，而加勒比海的很多的发展其实也建构在谎言之上。
好，谢谢那个 Chris 的回应，就我觉得其实今天听下来，我觉得蛮有趣的地方是我可以听到两个不同的艺术家Sharelly 跟 Chris 他们去分享他们自己的创作怎么去回应这个加勒比海地区的历史的状态。其实对我来说，我原本认为我们的关系是很远的，因为我觉得它是在地球的另一端。但是其实我们从台湾自己的状态去看这种，比如说人口在全球流动的状态呢，或者是我们在影像上面对的问题，以及观光的相对于岛屿的问题，我觉得都是我其实近期也在思考这些问题，所以我觉得这些东西对我们来说非常的有趣。那因为时间的关系，我们没有办法有更多的讨论，但是假如大家如果有其他机会的话，我也希望之后可以再跟两位再多聊聊关于你们的作品以及加勒比海地区的问题。然后因为时间的关系呢，所以我们必须就是先在这边做结束，那就谢谢 Sharelly 跟 Chris 两个的分享。
So thank you everyone for your participation. Because time is up, we have to close the session, but I would like to thank Sharelly and Christopher for your presentations, because I thought that Taiwan and Caribbeans are very far away. We are very far away physically, but in your presentation, we heard a lot of issues, for example, about migrations, about colonialisms, and also about how tourism impact on islands, for example. That's a topic that I have been thinking about in Taiwan as well. So actually, in those regards, we are quite similar. But due to time constraints, we have to close the sessions. But if there are other opportunities, I would hope that we can continue this set discussions in the near future. So once again, thank you everyone for your participation.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.